Yeah. Nobody does much. Okay, so chapter 9. I'm just playing around. Chapter 9. So last week we looked at, so we understand that there were 4 accounts that were given in the Bible, specifically of Paul's conversion. And in that space, did you get one of those things? Here's one of those things. So there were 3 specific. There's 3 specific accounts that were given in the book of Acts, which was authored by Luke. The first one was basically Luke's account of it, and it's a little more extensive. And then the other 2 in 22 and 26 were as if Paul was giving them, although we know that it was authored by Luke there. But we also know that in Galatians, Paul does actually give a account of his conversion. And when he does that, we see that I have this here. I made that other thing, and I took it down. We see here that when we start looking at all 4 of those accounts, if you just stick to Acts, you get a few details here and there and stuff like that. But when you fold in Galatians, where Paul's actually the one who is penning what is being told, we get some added details to that so that we can see the bigger picture of what really happened and kind of the series of events and things like that. And we also looked at the concept that in between each dispensation that we have, there's always a transition. Always a transition. Sometimes they're longer, sometimes they're shorter. And this book of Acts is basically this transition between something that has happened, something that is now as it is today, in the new dispensation that we're in. So we were transitioning out of the dispensation of law into the dispensation of grace. But we're also looking at the transitioning out of the covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, that kind of thing, that promised covenant, and into this new covenant. All right, and they're very close to each other, but they don't coincide with each other. But we do see that one economy is shifting. We're getting away from the old economy, the old law, the old Jewish economy, into this new dispensation, which is now the dispensation of the grace of God, which is what we see more in detail in books like Ephesians and things like that. So here we're seeing the apostle, the chief apostle that is given to, or that is called to be the messenger of this wonderful mystery that is given to us. And that's brought to us in Colossians, that's brought to us in Ephesians, this wonderful mystery of the dispensation of the grace of God. And here is where we start to see it begin. Now, as we started in the book of Acts, and as we continued through chapter 8, and even as we get into, as we'll see, as we get into 9, we see that it's been a very Jewish program. It's all Jewish program, Jewish program, Jewish program. We see, and I've talked about this conceptually, is that the Jewish program starts flowing, and as that Jewish, as that Jewish program starts flowing, we see that Jesus Christ has come. We find out from Paul that he's the fulfillment of the law, and this begins this new covenant that comes through his death, burial, and resurrection. And it comes up to that point where now it is brought once again before the religious elite, the religious leaders of the Hebrew people, of the nation of Israel, type of thing, of the Jews. And they now have the opportunity to accept Jesus Christ as Messiah. And when they don't do that, that then is almost like the river's flowing, the Jewish river's flowing there, and the dispensation of grace of God is almost dropped into that, and it kind of dams that up a little bit, and it stops the flow. And then there's this whole new program that's going on, which is now the dispensation of grace. And once the rapture comes, that little rock is then pulled away, and the river starts flowing again, and it starts picking up again with the Jewish program again. and it continues through. So we've already looked at that through our dispensational study and through our eschatological study, but now we're studying this transition time with the book of Acts. So up until now, we've seen how easily it's recognizable that it's still a Jewish program, right? Mm-hmm. And now we're getting up to chapter 9, right? And that's why we kind of looked at last week that there are 4 different accounts of his conversion and how important those things are because they give us different details. And we've recognized a few of those details when we looked at it last time. And we'll kind of, once again, kind of refresh those observations again as we go through this, in the chapter 9 here. And when we get to some of the later chapters, we'll once again, of course, kind of revisit a little bit what we're doing here. But to start off with, we want to do this. So let's get our heads back to where we are in the study. Last week, we kind of took a step back and looked at the conversion as a holistic thing, looking at it as the event, looking at it as the description of what kind of transpired and all that kind of stuff. Now we're going to get back into the individual verses and kind of get a little bit into them. You know what I'm saying? So does anybody have, before we do that, does anybody have any questions about stuff that we've talked about?
Not yet.
Okay, right on. All right. And there you go. Okay, right on. Okay, so here we see, let's get our heads back into where we are, right? So where were we? We were here at the end of 8. We're going through Philip. He is one of the chosen people that was to care for the people right there, right? He steps forward, Stephen stepped forward. He presents, he makes this very clear presentation about, he goes from the history all the way back to that covenant of promise from Abraham, that Abrahamic covenant, and moves it forward, right? And moves it forward to that particular point in time because they were contending that this guy, Stephen, was saying bad things, was professing that Jesus was the Messiah, was saying bad things about the church, was saying bad things about Moses and the law and all this stuff. He then stepped forward, gave him a whole history lesson and said, "You stiff-necked idiots, you guys have been the ones that have not been paying attention to what's been going on. You're the ones that haven't do this. How dare you bring those accusations against me when you guys traditionally have never followed through?" And that just made him mad. They took him out, stoned him to death, right? So it was from that point on that we see that presentation. Here is, to the religious elite, Stephen was talking not just to a person, but talking to the religious elite of that time, like the Sanhedrin, and telling them, here it is. They, of course, drug him out, killed him. And that kind of put a kibosh on their acceptance of there. So that's when we start to see this shift. Now, in between 9 and Stephen, basically, we see a couple of stories that are given there, and I think that is kind of a transition into what's happening after Stephen dies. Everybody scatters, man. They're all like roaches. They take off, man, because they're scared that, well, if they're going to go kill a guy like Stephen, because it was mentioned several times in Scripture, this guy is filled with the Holy Spirit, and he's doing wonderful things and all this kind of stuff. If they're going to kill that guy, man, we're out, So people scattered. But they were still teaching and preaching and telling stuff. We saw that guys like Philip would go up, and he goes up to, he goes to Samaria. He goes to Samaria and talks to the 10 tribes, basically, the Samaritans were the people that were kind of associated with the 10 tribes of Israel that separated from the 12 and the, that whole business there. And then he kind of went, God had already kind of handed over the whole of the Jewish program to the 12 disciples. But but now they were able to restore the 12 tribes, which is nice. And that kind of helped us lean into, if you are reminiscent and you remember the beginning of our eschatological study in Revelation, we saw that there were 24 seats and all this kind of stuff, and we said that 12, may have been the 12 tribes, and 12 may be the 12 apostles. We know that the 12 apostles were told that they're going to be sitting on thrones and ruling over, stuff. So anyway, so the restoration of the 12 tribes, that's kind of a nice thing. And we see that once again, then he goes to that Ethiopian eunuch, and he's preaching to that guy, and then he goes and baptizes him. He comes back up. They're walking out of the water, and all of a sudden, boom, the guy disappears. Freaked me out. And then we get to this part. The reason why we talk about Stephen's stoning is because that's the first time we ever see Saul come into play. He obviously was somebody of well-renowned amongst the Sanhedrin. He was obviously a Pharisee. He was obviously somebody who was well-educated, and we'll find that out later on as we go through our study. But he obviously was somebody. He was singled out amongst everybody that was there, because when everybody was about to go, jack Stephen, they're all taking off their coats and handing them to Saul, saying, hey, hold my coat while we go mess this guy up, tune him up right here. And that type of a thing. So obviously it was something. Then we saw later on that Saul condoned that, that killing and stuff like that. And here at the beginning of chapter 9 is where we begin. So his mission is simple, because his mission is reflective of what the religious elite, their mission is the same as what Saul's mission was. And the religious elite wanted to do what? They wanted to shut him up. They wanted to shut up the 12. They grabbed Peter off the street, told him to be quiet. He didn't do that. They grabbed the 12 later on, told them to be quiet. They didn't do that. But they couldn't really attack them because they had such thousands of people that were following them. So Stephen seemed like an easy target. So everybody scattered, but the 12 stayed. So here we see that at the beginning of chapter 9, I'm just kind of paint that picture for you. At the beginning of chapter 9, we see that Saul is still devoted to this concept. He's really devoted. And from everything that we've studied so far, like we've been doing studies on some of the Pauline epistles and stuff like that in our Sunday school classes, we get to see a picture that's starting to be painted about who this guy is. And that's going to be kind of important as we move forward. Because we need to really understand more about this guy. You know what I mean? This guy is dedicated. He's very zealous at what he does. He is educated. He's got a lot going for him. When we read verse 1, we see it says, then Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked for letters from them to the synagogues of Damascus, so that if he found any who were of the way, whether man or woman, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. So here we see from this verse, from these two verses, we kind of see like a monster, kind of.
Not so pretty picture.
Yeah, it's not a good look, right? Here this guy's breathing threats and murder, and he is, I think verse 2 is very, very interesting, because he asks for letters from the high priest, right, for the synagogues of Damascus. Now, history tells us that there's probably about, I told you before that synagogues popped up all over the place. Sometimes they were cultural, sometimes they had to do with certain different distinctive groups. Maybe they came from, there was a group that came from this country down to Jerusalem, and they stayed there for a while, and there only needed to be like maybe 10 people, and they could kind of make their own synagogue, type of a thing. History tells us there's maybe probably over 30 different synagogues in Damascus alone. So here, this guy goes to the high priest and asks for letters to go to these synagogues and see if he could find any who were of the way. We'll talk about the way in a second. But what do you think he's looking for? Where?
People to rest in church and synagogue.
Yeah. See, that's very interesting right here. It says that he's asking for letters to go into these synagogues, and he's looking for people of the way. The way, of course, what is the way? The way is, it's pretty simple, I think. It's in reference to Jesus himself. He, in John 14:6, he said, I am the way, the truth, the life, that type of a thing. He very frequently said, I am, a lot of the time. I am. Who are you? I am. There you be. And here, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. I think that kind of phrase kind of stuck, with identifying people that were following after Jesus, because Jesus said, I am the way. So people of the way makes sense, right? So here we see that Paul is this very intense guy. If we read Philippians 3, 5, and 6, Paul kind of gives his resume, so to speak, and we've talked about that before, and we've actually looked at that during our Sunday school class. Philippians 3, 5, and 6 says, he was circumcised on the 8th day, stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, as touched the law, a Pharisee, concerning zeal, persecuting the church, touching the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. Here he talks about how, if we remember, the southern kingdom of Judah was comprised of two groups, right? Judah, obviously, that's where we get the name Jews from. But it was also the tribe of Benjamin. Those two groups remained in Jerusalem and were identified as the Jews, right? And everybody else that was of the nation of Israel went to the northern kingdom and were ultimately taken over by the Assyrians. So when we see that Philip went into that area, into Samaria, and connected those groups together, he kind of united them. But here Paul is talking about, well, culturally speaking, those people of the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin, like those guys are the legit Jews. Like everybody else is those kind of Jews. But like these guys are legit Jews. And I was one of those. I was from the tribe of Benjamin, one of the original two that stuck with God. And I was circumcised on the 8th day, fulfilling the covenant that was given with Abraham. That when Abram changed his name to Abraham, there was that circumcision that was added onto it, which gave a new provision of promise to what was going on. And we'll talk about that a little bit later when Saul changes his name to Paul. But anywho, here we see that this guy is, a Hebrew of Hebrews. As far as the law goes, he was untouchable. He was blameless because he did all the stuff that the law said. And that was what the Pharisees were all about. The Pharisees were very deeds-oriented. They were very deeds-oriented. And so that was kind of their thing. And here he's talking about, man, I was zealous. I was persecuting the church. I was checking off every box when it came to the law. I did it all. So here we see that this guy, although the first two verses are not very pleasant looking, this is actually a guy that's just really devoted to serving God. It's very zealous at serving God. And we see this guy is just he is drinking the Kool-Aid, man. He is all in, you know what I mean? And doing whatever he can do to follow after God. So to that end, here we see that he's willing to drag men and women out of their homes, bound, and take them back to the Sanhedrin, take them back to Jerusalem to stand trial for committing themselves to the way, following after Jesus here. And so much so that he's breathing threats and murder, which is crazy. But considering the fact that they kind of threw the law out the window and took Stephen out and back and stoned him to death, that's not exactly the law either. So here we see that this guy although not very becoming the way he looked at it, the way it starts, this guy is definitely all in. He once again gets these letters so that he can go into the synagogues. He must be thinking, we're still doing this, once again, you got to wrap your head around this concept. We're still doing a Jewish program. So if the people that were in Jerusalem were Jews and they're accepting the way and they scatter, where would be an easy place to go to hide? Synagogue, right? If there's that many synagogues in Damascus, you could easily go hide amongst that group and not worry about it. But if you're still preaching about the way or about Jesus Christ, then you're going to cause that infighting. So sure enough, this guy is pretty clever, and he goes, well, I want to go into the synagogues. First we got to purge the synagogues, make sure that they're clean, and then start going from there, right? So it makes a whole lot of sense that he wants to go into the synagogues, start there, and then go and do, whatever he needs to do, getting people out of there so that they can stay true to what they think or what he feels is the true, message that God would have them to be. So here we see that, and if you looked at all the accounts that were given to us, we see that that's kind of how it plays out as well. He just starts heading out there and starts going, and it's important to look at the idea that he didn't just do this. He didn't just champion this thing on his own. He actually was smart enough that he was zealous to want to do these things, but he never went on his own authority. That's a big piece of the puzzle too. Here he went to the high priest and he says, give me letters that will allow me to just barge into these synagogues and start, interrogating people, dragging them out of their homes. That's what he wanted to do. And as we've seen, that wouldn't be a far cry from what the religious elite would have wanted also, because they were so concerned about this guy Jesus. When Jesus was alive, we've kind of been talking about that in our church service. When Jesus was alive, the Pharisees and the scribes were so concerned about him. If he keeps doing this, he's going to,
You're going to believe him.
Yeah, they're going to believe him, and they're going to take away our authority, and that's not cool. So we got to do something about this guy. So they ultimately killed him. But then when he rose from the dead, that was the kicker. You would think from that point they would go, oh, maybe we were wrong. No, they're doubling down. They gotta, they gotta hold on to their quote unquote integrity in this, even though they know that they're probably wrong. So here we see that he gets this, these letters. Verse 3, and as he journeyed, he came near Damascus, because this is where he's headed, right? So he's on that road right there. And suddenly a light shone around him from heaven. And he fell to the ground and heard a voice saying, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Here we see that he's following through. He's doing what he's supposed to do. He's all in. He thinks he's doing 100% of what he's supposed to do for God, right? And he's committed to doing whatever it takes to do what needs to be done for God. And so he's on his way to Damascus, and as he gets closer, all of a sudden, suddenly a light shone around him from heaven, bright light. From some of the other accounts, it just says, like in 22, about noon, a great light from heaven suddenly shone around me. All right, so it was midday. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So that's just another little piece of that puzzle. If you look at 26. We see that a light shone around me and those who journeyed with me. He says that it's actually, if you look at verse 13, he says it's midday, which we already kind of established. I saw a light from heaven brighter than the sun. All right? So obviously it was something, really brilliant. It came upon him quickly, and it was, there. We also know that from all of these accounts, there were people traveling with him, right? And we'll get to that a little bit later too, but there were other people that were traveling with him. So here we see that Paul's traveling down there, and he's going, And all of a sudden, boom, this big light hands, and poof, what does he do? He hits the ground. He hits the dirt. And then as he fell to the ground, he heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? We talked about this last time. If we look at the different accounts, we see that the people that were traveling with him heard the voice, right? Paul tells us in Acts 26 that he heard the voice of God in Hebrew, okay? Which is interesting, once again, because if he was traveling with an entourage from the Sanhedrin, obviously they were probably Jewish in nature. And if they were Jews, then they would know the Hebrew language. If they were from the Sanhedrin, that kind of thing, they would know the Hebrew language. But if he was hearing this in Hebrew, and they couldn't understand it, then obviously there's a problem there. Well, not a problem, but there's obviously something bigger going on there. God is allowing Saul to hear it, and not them. I think it's interesting that they hear the voice, this group of people hears that voice, and they don't understand it. This happens, I don't know, it doesn't really happen out here, but it happens a lot in California. You're standing in line at the grocery store, and the person in front of you is speaking Spanish fluently. And I know enough Spanish to get my face slapped. That's about all I know. So I'm listening to them, and I probably pick out every fourth or fifth word and know what that is. But whatever they're talking about, I have no clue, right? So imagine that for just a second. Booming voice from heaven. You can hear it, but you don't understand a word that's being said. And yet, Paul says, well, I heard it in Hebrew. Like, I totally understood it easily because it was speaking in Hebrew. So it was obviously a message that was meant specifically for Saul, all right? And that message is, why are you persecuting me? All right? His intent in verse 2 was that he was going to Damascus to find people that were following what? The way, which is the message of Jesus Christ. So when he says, why are you persecuting me? He's not saying, why are you persecuting my followers? Why are you persecuting the church? Why are you persecuting people in synagogues? Why are you persecuting me? It's the message that he's going against right here. Why is that important? Well, because we're on this Jewish program, right? And the crux of it all is for the Jewish elite, the religious elite, to accept Jesus as Messiah. Yeah. And they're not. They're fighting against Christ. That's the crux of it all. And here he's basically the chief prosecutor of people that believe in Christ. So it makes perfect sense that he would say, why are you persecuting me? All right? Not my church, not my people. Why are you persecuting me? Because the message is about me. Salvation is about me. Why is it called the way? I am the way, the truth, and the life. It's about me. Why are you persecuting me? Makes perfect sense, right? Why this is going on. All right?
In John.
What's that?
In John, Jesus said, John, I'm just trying to find that one.
14:6.
14:6 is I am the way, the truth, and the life.
Okay.
That's what you're looking for?
Yeah, that and when Jesus said, when he opened up, he said, in the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was with God.
That's
Word
1:1.
That's 1:1.
Yeah.
So he's kind of telling Paul, don't you remember that I said I was the Word, and the Word was, So you're going against me.
Yeah, you're going against me. I mean, ultimately, you're persecuting the people that are following me, and you're persecuting the people that believe in me, and you're persecuting the people, but let's cut to the chase. It's me. Yeah. You're persecuting me.
But at the time, Saul didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah.
Right. He was still part of the whole Sanhedrin, still drinking that Kool-Aid that is not what that's all about. So, then we get to a very interesting statement that Vivian asked about that will actually come into play here in a few verses. he says, okay, so we're looking at the thing, he's traveling down the road, flashlight, he falls to the ground, and this big booming voice, why are you persecuting me? And he says, who are you, Lord? And then, to continue on with verse 5, then the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom you're persecuting. Okay, once again, he identifies himself. Just kind of throwing in there the concept that the scripture is not supposed to be confusing or anything. He identifies what's going on. And you'll see that happen over and over again. Like sometimes things are a little ambiguous or something, and Jesus will go, no, this is what's, here it is, right? I'm Jesus, okay? I'm Jesus who you're persecuting. So let's kind of get it going. As I told you before, maybe your translation says, it is hard for you to kick against the goads or against the prick or something like that, or the prickles or something or whatever. That is not part of this particular piece of the puzzle. In other accounts, in Acts 26, when it was recounted, it does say that. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. It is not actually in this part of Luke. It's actually in a later part of Luke. Some manuscripts add it here, but it wasn't originally necessarily there.
That's why it's been added.
Yes, it was added because it was part of the story, but it wasn't necessarily accounted right there. So the fact that it's added there, and it's not because it's something that they made up. It's actually part of the account given in 26. But they added it here for that sake. And we'll talk about that when we get to 26, but not right now. He says, I am Jesus whom you're persecuting. All right? So, I really don't want to talk about it right now. I want to wait. I want to wait till verse 10.
You're gonna wait till
I want to wait till verse 10. If you can hold on till verse 10.
Okay.
Okay? If you can
If we
hold
get
that
to it
idea.
tonight.
We'll get to it, okay?
Okay.
Who are you, Lord? All right? The question is very interesting because it is in contrast to what we see in verse 10. I'll give you that piece. Okay? It is very much in contrast to verse 10. And it's totally ironic. That's why it's so interesting that I gotta wait till 10. Okay? Believe it or not. It's a very interesting statement, and it becomes clear in verse 10. And it's so ironic that I have to wait. I can't jump ahead. So, verse 6. So he, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what would you want me to do? All right? So here he says, I'm Jesus, whom you persecuted. He doesn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah, but here he is, appearing to him, talking to him, on the road to Damascus. So now he kind of, things change. Who are you, Lord? Now he's saying, Lord, what do you want me to do? I think that's a little different. First one was a question, well, who is this? Like you ever answered a phone call and it's an unknown caller and they're like, hey, how you doing? And you're like, who is this? I want to know who I'm talking to. Before you start doing, hey man, how you doing? I'm sorry, who is this? Oh yeah, okay, yeah, I get it. He kind of changes his tune a little bit. Lord, what do you want me to do? All right. Then the Lord said to him, arise and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. All right. So that here he is asking for instruction, and he tells him what to do. Get out of here and head on over to Damascus. Here, it's important. In all of the accounts, he goes, rise. In the 22 account, he says, rise and go to Damascus. Here in the 26 account, he says the same thing. Rise, stand upon your feet. I have given you a purpose, appointed to you a servant and a witness to the things which you have come and seen in me, to those which I have appeared to you, deliver you from the people and from the Gentiles to whom I am sending you. So he's telling him, get up and go. Okay? So here he is on his face. He's like, get up and get going. Head on into Damascus, and I'll tell you what you need to do. Okay? I'll throw it in there, and I'll let you know what you got to get, what needs to happen. All right? So that is kind of an interesting piece of the puzzle, and the only reason I say that is because here the message that we're looking at here, why are you persecuting me? It's because if you're persecuting me, you're persecuting everybody. The message of salvation is about me, and this whole thing revolves around me, and all that kind of stuff. I know you're not committed to understanding that I am the Son of God, that I'm the Messiah. None of that happens, right? As a matter of fact, we're going to see a little bit later that he actually identifies him differently than you would imagine, because the idea is for the religious elite to accept him as Messiah. But the first thing Saul does is he goes and preaches that Jesus is the Son of God. So we'll see that in a few here. But here we see the shift in his tone. Verse 5, who are you? And in verse 6, Lord, what do you want me to do? I think when he was in verse 5, he recognized that whoever's talking obviously is a bigger deal than I am. Whether or not it's, whoever it is, because he's not buying the idea that Jesus is the Messiah. But if you're walking down the road and all of a sudden there's a blinding light and it takes you to the ground and you hear this big booming voice from heaven, obviously that's something greater than you are.
Establishing bona fide.
Yeah, exactly. You got to get the pecking order here going.
You got to think that he thought it was God.
Well, yeah, he must have thought something like that. Like
right.
well, who are you, Lord? Giving saying the word Lord is giving whoever's talking respect, because he obviously this is somebody superior than to him, right? But he wants to make sure that he clarifies this. So respect is important here, but he doesn't know exactly who he's talking to. Then Jesus identifies this. Who are you, Lord? He's maybe expecting in his head, well, this is God. You know what I mean? How many times has God done that? Tons of times. If he's a student of the law, or if he's the student of the Old Testament, he'd obviously know that God does that all the time. Abraham, Joseph,
That's why
Moses.
I would think he was thinking, this is God talking
Yeah,
to me.
for sure. He's got to be thinking, well, this obviously must be somebody bigger than me, probably God. Let's see what's up. So I don't know who this is, but I'm going to give him respect. And then he goes, I'm Jesus. Oh, okay, well, what would you have me do? Here I'm, think of it in his head. I'm literally on the road to Damascus to go persecute people that are following you, and now you're talking to me. You know what I mean? Like, on a level of 1 to 10, how much trouble am I in? Probably a 12. You know what I'm saying? He's probably going, holy cow, I am way in over my head right now. What would you have me do? Like, oh my goodness, am I going to get smoked right now? Type of a scenario.
You want to put a little more theater in your head at that point, but something must have really happened with his first voice, which is, yo, Saul, what you doing?
Yeah, exactly.
That must have really went straight to his core.
For sure. But, think about that. How often that happens. Happened with Adam, with Cain. It happened in those ways, what are you doing? Where are you at? What's happening? Here, why do you persecute me? Does he know the answer to this question? Of course he does. But he's trying to get your attention and get you to start wrapping your head around what's happening right now. What would you have me do? Get up, go to the city, and I'll tell you what to do. So that's his marching orders right here. All right? Here in verse 7, and the men who journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing the voice, but seeing no one. And Saul arose from the ground, and when his eyes were open, he saw no one. But they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. And he was 3 days without sight, neither ate nor drank. It's a little interesting. I think it's a little interesting personally. We know that through our continued study of Paul, that he had some kind of probably eye problems, some eye disease-y kind of thing. And I'm sure that it probably caused him a lot of headaches, maybe blurred vision, maybe unable to see things from time to time, right? So here, he is journeying with a bunch of people, and it just kind of talks about it. Matter of factly, he arose and he couldn't see anything, so they led him by the hand to Damascus. That may have been something that could have happened before, or maybe he brings people with him in case that happens, who knows? We don't know what kind of eye issues he had. We know that there was some kind of problem. He called it a thorn in his flesh, all that kind of stuff. But here, his eyes were open, he didn't see anyone, so they just led him there. But it had a profound effect on him, though, in verse 9, because 3 days he was without sight, and he neither ate nor drank. I think the idea of 3 is very important. What does 3 tell us? Yeah, like completeness, wholeness, that type of a thing. Christ was in the grave 3 days. Why 3 days? Because if he would have just popped up the next day, it would have been suspicious. 3 days shows the completeness, the wholeness of what he did, that type of a thing. Here, he's 3 days without sight. Maybe it's you got an eye problem and you saw a bright light, so maybe your eyesight will come back tomorrow, and then maybe it'll come back tomorrow, maybe it'll come back tomorrow. 3 days later, I think you're blind, dude. I mean, after 3 days, you're kind of like, that type of thing kind of happens. So I think it's kind of interesting that these little details we just kind of notice, that he is like without his sight, and there are those people that take him and led him around and whatnot, and those types of things, right? And we see that he for 3 days was without sight, and he didn't eat or drink. So here we see that he's just. We kind of get the idea that after this encounter, from verse 9, what do you kind of picture Saul doing?
Kind of feeling sorry for himself, not eating, not drinking.
Yeah,
I would say it would be fear.
It could be.
Could be.
Could be. So here we
So
kind of.
he doesn't know, am I fixing to be persecuted for what I'm doing?
Right, exactly. So as in the context of what we see here, what should I do? Okay, you want me to go to Damascus, just hang out there and see what happens. And for 3 days he doesn't have any sight, so he isn't eating or drinking. The picture that's being painted there is like.
That would be a real horror story.
Oh yeah, he's probably just sitting there contemplating his life choices. You know what I'm saying?
Is this my punishment for
Yeah,
what I've done?
exactly.
Yeah.
This is contemplating my life choices about what has been going on. Now, what we see in these next few verses is very interesting, because God tells Ananias what Paul has been doing ever since he got to Damascus. So we kind of see him, if you just stop reading right there and you don't, it doesn't tell you what he's doing. So because you don't know what he's doing, you might want to fill in the blanks with maybe your own personal experience or something like that, or what you think he might be thinking or whatever. But here when we get to the story of Ananias, which is probably happening simultaneously with what's happening. He gets struck down, and then Ananias, while they're traveling to Damascus, here Ananias is being prepped for what to do, that type of a thing. So here we see what actually is transpiring with Paul and what goes on, with Saul, I should say, and what happens next. So verse 10, I'll get to it now, I promise. Now, there was a certain disciple at Damascus named Ananias, and to him the Lord said in a vision, Ananias. And Ananias said, what?
Here I am, Lord.
Okay. Okay, we're going to talk about it now. I know you're in there. I know you're so excited about this one. Okay? This is the contrast that I think is very interesting. Ananias was in a very small group of people that when God spoke to them, they didn't like freak out per se. They just recognized him and said, here I am. Like, Lord spoke to him, he goes, okay, I'm here. What do you need? You know, type of a thing, right? Ready, almost on call. You know, God calls to them and they're ready on call. They go, okay, I'm your guy. What is it that you need me to do? So here we see, when did we see stuff like that? I've already kind of mentioned it. Abraham. When he came to Abraham, when God's voice came to Abraham, I need you to sacrifice your son. And then right before he was about to sacrifice his son, he came to him again. And in those instances, in both of those instances, he said, here I am. I'm ready to do whatever it is that you have me to do. That was in Genesis 22 and in Genesis 22. When he called Jacob, all right, same thing. When Jacob was going to, save, preserve basically the future, save his family, but preserve the nation of Israel, he came to him in Genesis 31 and in Genesis 46. And what did Jacob say? Here I am. I'm ready to rock and roll. What do you need? Here we see in Moses, even though Moses fussed, when God talked to him through a burning bush, his reaction, here I am. Right? Isaiah answered, here I am, send me. You know what I mean? In Isaiah 6. So here we see Ananias joins this nice little band of people that when God speaks to them, their hearts are so in tune with God that they're just like, here I am. Okay? Now, how is that different from Saul?
They were in tune.
Yeah, Saul thought very clearly and believed very intently that he was doing God's will, right? He was very much feeling that this is what I need to do for God. I need to get all these people that are believing the way, but it was very misguided, right? It was very misguided. These other guys, God just said, hey, I need you, and they said, I'm ready. Here I am. Here, when he was asked, when God came, why are you persecuting me? What was his response? Here I am?
Who are you?
Yeah, who are you? He was not in tune there. This is the contrast that we hear. Saul thought he was serving God. Ananias knew he could serve God, and he was a guy. As a matter of fact, if you look at some of the other accounts, in Acts 22, in verse 12, it says, and one Ananias, a devout man, according to the law, well spoken of by the Jews who lived there, came to me. Here, this guy Ananias wasn't just some random dude. He was some guy that was well known. He was obviously Jewish. He was well known amongst the Jewish community. He was well respected, probably well educated. When God came to him, he was like, here I am, ready to go. But when Christ came to Saul, he was confused as to who he was talking to, right? If he was really in tune with what God wanted him to do, and he was really in tune with what he was, doing for God, his response might have been, "Here I am." Why are you persecuting me? Well, here I am, Lord. What do you mean? No. His was like, well, who am I talking to? Here we see that a lot of these guys that we see over and over again in the Bible, when God speaks to them, here I am. That happens. So here we see this contrast of what is there. Saul might have been fearful. He might have been concerned about his own well-being, like you said. He's probably looking out for his own neck or his own skin because, he may be a little scared, a little fearful, whatever. Who am I talking to? Oh my goodness, this looks bad for me. Here, Ananias, here I am. So it's very interesting, I think, this response, right? He responds out of respect because he probably understands that whatever he's talking to or whoever he's talking to is a little bit more powerful than he is. But he doesn't recognize who it is because he's not in tune with God's will, even though he thinks that he's doing what he's supposed to do, which then leans into the idea that you could be very passionate about what you're doing and be passionately misguided. You know, you can be passionately wrong, you know. So here we see that really coming out in this contrast between Ananias
I
and
guess
between
that
Saul.
kind of makes sense because the first question that Jesus asked to him is, why are you prosecuting me? He's thinking God, and he's thinking he's serving God by carrying out the law.
Right. So who am I really talking
who
to?
are you talking to?
Yeah.
You know, who are you that you say I'm persecuting you?
Right.
So,
So
yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's yeah.
I wrote in my Bible, I don't know what you think about this. It was Jehovah that Saul was serving, but Jesus he was trying to stamp out.
Right.
And suddenly he realized that they were one and the same.
Yes. And that becomes true later on.
Right.
Yeah. But yes, that becomes true because, like I said, we haven't got there yet, and I don't want to jump ahead, but I'll do it.
Yeah.
First thing he does when he gets in there, he gets his sight back. He goes into the synagogue, which is where he was going in the first place. That was his whole plan. But instead, this time, he's preaching that Jesus is the Son of God. He didn't say Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is the Son of God. All right? Which is a little bit more hefty. We know that Messiah means Christ.
Yeah.
And he is the leader. He is their Savior. This guy is God. Like, this guy is God. Legit God.
Yeah.
Which, to me, I think holds a little bit more weight because he's trying to get the Jewish people to accept Jesus Christ as Messiah. Here, Paul is like, this dude's God. Like, this guy's legit. Like, whatever I was doing before, I was out of my mind because this guy is the guy, you know? So I think that's very important for us to kind of see those contrasts between the conversation he had with Saul, who he thought was totally committed. Saul thought he was totally committed. And with Ananias, who really was committed. He's just sitting around his house, right? Sitting around his house with his feet up, and God calls him, and he jumps to his feet. Here I am, ready to go. What are we doing? Whereas here, Saul is like ready to beat down doors. He's ready to drag people out of their homes. He's going to go clean house in the synagogues. He's going to do all these things because he feels like he's in tune with what God wants. We find that's not true.
You know, I find it so fascinating that God chose Saul, who was totally persecuting him and anybody who believed him, to be the one to go out and spread the word. To
Saul, out of all the crazy people you could pick, Saul was the perfect guy.
Well, because I know
So
he believed.
educated
Yeah.
in the law.
Yeah.
He had a Jewish parent, but he also had a Roman parent. So he had Roman citizenship, and yet he also had Jewish heritage.
Yeah.
He was highly educated in
Right.
the law. He could do and go places other people couldn't go.
Right.
You know what I mean? Not to mention his high standing amongst the Pharisees made him the ideal guy, you know? And plus, he was the chief persecutor. So if you had the guy that was the number one guy that was persecuting you, switch sides, well, maybe there's something to the message. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? If that guy is willing to jump on board, then maybe that's legit. You know what I mean?
I find it interesting that he lost his sight for 3 days, and he fasted for 3 days. He fasted for those days. I kind of wonder if he wasn't telling himself, why didn't I know that voice?
It
When
could have been.
everybody else did, I didn't know it, and I got a true spanking
Well-
because I don't have my sight back, and I can't eat. I just can't eat. I have
Right.
to fast for 3 days.
Well,
He was a
it's-
law-abiding.
It's interesting you say that because in verse 11 it says, "And the Lord said to Ananias,
Yeah.
arise and go to the street called Straight," which actually is still in existence today.
Straight Street.
And inquire at the house of Judas, some dude named Judas, it's not the same Judas, obviously, for one called Saul of Tarsus, for behold, he is praying for 3 days.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes a whole lot of sense now. You initially you think he's probably sitting there contemplating his life choices, but now maybe he is. Maybe he's sitting there praying for 3 days going, why didn't I recognize that voice? What have I been doing? Why have I been persecuting God or Christ? he's obviously the Son of God. What was I thinking? You know, for 3 days.
Yeah.
He's probably just praying to God going, oh my word.
Literally open my eyes and let
Yeah,
me see
exactly.
what I need to see.
And it's, to me, personally, I think it's, once again, ironic. I think the irony is like an onion. You peel it back and there's more to it, more layers of the irony. Because here we see that he, being the chief persecutor of the way, of people that believe in Jesus, and he is now being humbled by that same message, and now is, finds himself at the foot of Christ, realizing who he is. The irony there, and that he spends all this time praying, like, maybe I just didn't get this, maybe I didn't quite understand this. He's just, the whole thing, you can just look at it and just see how packed this is.
Have you ever wondered though why they went to the house of Judah? I mean, how did those people know to take him to the house of Judas?
Well,
You know, all of a sudden they were.
it doesn't say much about that. It doesn't say anything about that. And there's a couple of ideas. All right.
Because the
Judas-
people that were with him were.
The people that were with him took him to a place.
Yeah.
And they took him to a place, and they took him to this guy's, Judas's house. They did not receive instruction
Right.
Yeah.
where to take him, because they heard the booming voice, but they couldn't understand it. So they took him to a place where they felt that they could take him to.
You think it was a doctor or something?
That's another thing. I don't know. Maybe this guy is a Pharisee.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Maybe this guy's a Pharisee. That's why when God tells Ananias, hey, go, give this guy a sight back, he's kind of like, that's like walking into the lion's den. Like, why would I want to do that, Lord? Type of a thing.
Yeah.
Maybe this guy Judas, it doesn't tell us. Maybe this guy Judas, maybe the house, maybe it was the first house he came to. Maybe, because back then hospitality was a big thing, and if somebody came knocking on your door, they would let them in and, feed them and stuff like that. Like, that was a big thing back in those days. Maybe he took them to a Pharisee's house. Like, maybe that's where they were going to stay, was at this Pharisee's house or whatever. So they led him to this guy's house. Kind of don't know. But it is a little interesting, to think about. But here he goes to this house, Judas, and he says Saul of Tarsus is there, and he's praying. That's what he's doing. For 3 days, he's been sitting there actually contemplating his life choices, because he just couldn't recognize what was going on. Maybe he's thinking to himself, what have I been doing? Type of a thing. Verse 12, and in a vision, he has seen a man named Ananias coming in and putting his hand on him so that he might see. So obviously he can't see anything, so he comes to him in a vision. He's sitting there praying for 3 days, and a vision comes to him and says, hey, this guy Ananias is going to come. He's going to restore your sight. Originally he says, go in, hang out there until I give you further instructions. And then he comes to him in a vision and says, hey, Ananias is coming. He'll restore your sight. It's kind of interesting because this story of Saul is much like the story of the religious elite. They were so adamant on persecuting Christ, and now which blinded them to the true message of who he is. And now this guy, this believer of the way, is going to come and restore you, and give you your sight back and give you direction. Because God said, hang up until you get direction. Well, this guy is going to come and give you direction and restore your sight. I think it's totally, once again, steeped with foreshadowing, steeped with irony, steeped with everything. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of cool. That type of a thing. So, he's preparing Saul. He's sitting there praying. He's preparing Ananias, because Ananias is going to go to this guy's house. And in verse 13, once again, we see the natural response, which I think I would probably give. And that is, and Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard from many about this man. So does he know him? No, but he's heard about him. His reputation precedes him. How much harm he has done to our saints in Jerusalem. How would he would have known that? Well, all the saints, you're talking thousands of people scattered. They went south and they went north. So they scattered everywhere. So the word is out about this guy, about Saul. So his reputation precedes him, right? Verse 14, and here he has the authority from the chief priest to bind all who call on your name. Here we see that not only has his reputation spread, but his intent. Okay? When everybody first saw Stephen get killed, man, they scattered. But everybody was still talking, and word was getting around still, even at the furthest reaches of where things were going. You know what I'm saying? Even all over the place.
This guy Saul
Which-
condoned it all.
Yeah, which is interesting because why talk about Philip? Why talk about Philip? Philip went north, and then he went south. And then he was left there and went, a little farther north again, into the middle part in Caesarea, right? So here we see this guy Philip, he was all over the place, right? He kind of went this way and that way, and he was all over the place talking to people. So you got to know people were traveling around, the word was getting out. You know what I'm saying? So it's obvious that, people are talking. So his reputation preceded him. His plans preceded him. Everything is there. And he says he has authority from the chief priest to go out and just nail people. And verse 15, but the Lord said to him, go, for he is a chosen vessel of mine to bear my name before Gentiles, kings, and children of Israel. For I will show him how many things he must suffer for my sake. I think it's really interesting if you look at the scope of Paul's ministry. Here, God calls it before he even gets going.
That says a mouthful.
Oh, yeah. Before the Gentiles, he's the apostle to the Gentiles, right? Is he supposed to talk to the children of Israel? Yeah, he talks to the children of Israel because Israel and the Gentiles, the Jews and Gentiles, are now on an even keel, right? They're all in the same thing. So where does he go first when he goes and talks to places? He goes to the synagogue. Why? Because he can go there. Because he's a Jew and he was a Pharisee, and he can easily access that and go to the synagogue and preach that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, talk about the gospel message, all that kind of stuff. He can get in there easy. All right? He talks to the Gentiles to inform them, but it also says he talks to kings. Well, we know that he did that. We know that he was incarcerated, right? He was incarcerated a couple of times, actually, on house arrest. And people like rulers and kings would come to him. He would never be able to go to them because they would never receive him, but they came to him, and he was able to talk to them. Yes?
It says that I will show him how many things he must suffer for my name's sake. Is that a punishment?
Good question, actually. Once again, irony, all over the place, slapping you in the face. The chief prosecutor will now become the persecuted. Here's this guy legitimately willing to do whatever. He was willing to go the distance and do whatever it took to serve God, and yet he was misguided in what he was doing. So now, if he's really going to pick up the mantle of the apostle to the Gentiles, just think of how difficult that's going to be. As soon as he walks into town, just like Ananias, obviously people know his reputation. Obviously people know who this guy is and know what his intentions are. So if you walk into town, I want to meet with some of the Christians. I'm not going to tell you I'm a Christian. What are you, nutso?
Not only that, just going into the synagogues. Because surely the word got out
that he might have switched
that
sides.
he switched sides.
For sure.
So he's going into these synagogues and they're going, what are you doing in here?
Exactly. So he's now become a pariah to both sides, and yet he still stands strong because this guy has to be committed, and he is committed. Yeah. He just was misdirected. Now Christ is focusing his efforts in the right direction. This guy, he'll go. He doesn't care if people listen or don't listen. He's all in. So he's gonna forge ahead. He's just gonna plow into it with both feet.
Surely he knows that eventually he's going to get in trouble for it. I think he knew ahead of time that he was gonna be arrested all these times because of the fact that he's now preaching against the Pharisees and what they're trying to tell the world.
Oh yeah, for sure. So yeah, it's punishment, maybe, but it's the reality of life. You know, we talked about in our study in Colossians that standing for the Christian belief, standing for faith in God and for Christ is going to be difficult.
Yeah.
You know, it's just the way it is.
Just like all of the other people that he has been persecuting and chasing after, he's gonna be one of them now.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, we see it over and over again. You know, he went into Thessalonica, and they wanted to kill him, so he had to be spirited away. As a matter of fact, we don't even leave Genesis. Acts. My bad. We don't even leave Acts before we find out he has to escape Jerusalem. You know, before they want to string him up. You know what I mean? You know, he has to leave Damascus. He has to leave Jerusalem. He has to leave several places because they want to string him up. You know
It's
what I
kind of funny. One more point.
Mhm.
For I will show him how much he must suffer, and God's going to teach him visual learning. And you can look at Saul and say, well, if he's a Pharisee, yeah, he's a book learner. And I'm not. I mean, I can read stuff, but I have to read things 3 times, right, for it to sink in.
Oh, for sure.
And God's like, okay, you think you're smart, you can read one time, now I'm going to show you. And it's like he's going to teach him a visual learning skill.
Yeah. Just another piece of the puzzle. When you get to Acts 26, you know, it says there in the account of the conversion that he gives there, verse 16, but rise, stand up on your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to appoint you as a servant and a witness to the things which you have seen me, and to those which I will appear to you, delivering you from your people and from Gentiles, to whom I am sending you, to open their eyes, so that they may turn from darkness to light, and the power of Satan to God. I think it's just interesting that, you know, that little extra piece of the puzzle. You know, this whole process started when I shone my light upon you, and that brought about the darkness until Ananias came and showed you
the light.
Yeah, showed you the light, showed you what to do. Well, now you got to do that very thing. Now it's your job. You go out and you take those people that are in darkness, and you show them the light. It's really interesting how all these things kind of play out together, and they kind of interweave, and the messages that are given there, and the extra little pieces of the puzzle that kind of fit together. It's kind of cool, and how it's just rich with meaning. It's just kind of cool to me, because I'm a nerd. All right, what time is it? Oh, it's like 7:30. Does anybody have any thoughts, comments, questions? We'll probably stop at 17 and 18. Actually, it starts to get a little more hairy at this point right here. The point in which Paul becomes saved, and the starting of new dispensation, and actually it's just the kind of when Paul gets saved, and if he's part of the body of Christ, and yada yada yada, that can all come into play, into question right here in these verses. And it's a long conversation that isn't necessarily something that we can do in the next 2 or 3 minutes. So I'll pause right there. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments, observations, questions, and anything?
So these letters that Paul or Saul took to the synagogues, did he have to give them to the high priest of the synagogue, or a priest of, or
Yeah,
how
if he
did
would,
get
yeah,
the door?
if he would go,
If
like,
he'd have made it there.
yeah, if he would have made it there.
Yeah,
He would have
okay.
just taken those. He had so the high priest was in Jerusalem.
Okay.
Okay, like the high priest,
Yeah.
like the head honcho guy.
Yeah. Okay.
But each synagogue
Yeah.
had its own. They always would have a scribe who who is a student of the law. It could be a Pharisee or a Sadducee. It didn't really matter.
Okay.
But a scribe is somebody that would transcribe things. He would give certificates of things like for marriage or the sale of property or something like that. That's what scribes did.
Okay.
There was probably always going to be some kind of leader there, some priest there.
Okay.
There was probably a Sadducee or Pharisee, probably a Pharisee. He was a chief Pharisee,
Yeah.
Paul was, or
Yeah.
Saul was.
Yeah.
So he would have this letter, and he would go into the synagogue
Yeah.
and meet with the guy that was in charge of that synagogue,
Yeah.
like the pastor of that
Yeah.
synagogue, and say, here, I got this letter to go interrogate your people and to see if we can find anybody that's going to the way. Like, just imagine that here in this church if some government
Somebody
dude
just
came
showed
in.
up.
Yeah. I mean, the reason why we are a non-denominational church, I think I mentioned that on Sunday, is because denominations like own stuff. Like they own your building, they staff your building with pastors and things like
Okay.
that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So they come in and they keep a watch on what you're doing and make sure you're adhering to their standards and stuff. It's like a franchise of a restaurant,
Okay.
type of a thing. That's a very loose and
Okay.
probably heretical thing. But that type of thing. So what he'd do is he'd just take that letter in, go into the guy that's in charge of that and go, here, I'm going to go around and it's like a warrant. I'm going to search these premises and I'm going to talk to all your people. I'm going to see if anybody here is a member of the way. And if they are, I'm taking them. And they would look at that letter and go, okay. You know what I mean? Like,
And I
all right,
kind of feel
I don't like it, but okay.
I
you
kind
know.
of feel like the
Okay.
people that he brought with him were like the guards that would take these people.
Oh, for
back
sure.
to Jerusalem.
For sure, they were probably members of his court and were going to be the guys they were probably wise men, bouncers, all kinds of different people that would go and do that kind of thing. If they're, you needed somebody to, if you need some muscle,
Surely
these guys
Saul
in here
couldn't
and-
carry him back all by
Oh, yeah,
himself,
for sure.
So,
So, yeah.
Yeah. Dark suits, sunglasses.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. They come in. Are you so and so?
That's
Come
what-
with me.
yeah,
You know?
that's what you picture, yeah.
And then, hood over the head and you're gone. You know what I mean? And yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what happened right there. You're so and so, hood over the head and you're out the door. And you never hear from them again.
So what happens if they do it like in the 21st century, like now, like whoever goes to whatever happens to this election, whatever, and
Yeah.
the company bring the letters looking for Christians.
Well,
What do you?
interesting you say that because it wasn't so long ago that some of the leadership of certain counties and states were requiring pastors to submit their sermons prior to their Sunday morning service to see if there was anything in there that was contrary to their belief or the subject matter was contrary to their message to the people of that state or to that county. It got overturned, of course, but it wasn't so long ago that was a thing. There was, I don't even remember where it was, there was a place who had a governor who was a woman and she was a lesbian. So she wanted everybody in her county that was a pastor to submit their sermon prior to Sunday so that she could go through them and see if it said anything contrary to her belief system.
What, like communism?
Well, that's why it didn't stick. But it wasn't so long that it happened. It wasn't so long ago that it happened. It was probably about, well, it's been a bit now.
What's that? 80?
Try
What?
10 years ago.
What?
Oh, yeah.
20? Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
10, 15 years ago? For sure. Yeah. They even made a God's Not Dead about it.
Oh, no.
And I told you that I came from the Methodist church.
Yeah.
Like about
Yeah,
2
well,
years ago, so
yeah.
you know what was going on.
Yeah.
And
Oh, I know.
it got kind of, my church didn't go the way a lot of these churches did, but still it was kind of contentious,
Oh, sure.
Oh,
For
I,
sure.
I know. I was at a church, I'm not going to say, it's the Catholic church, and so I I walked in with the other funeral director who was actually in charge of that family, and he was parking the car, and I went in, and then I was like, "Oh, hey, so it's a woman standing there, kind of short," and I said, "Oh, hey, so where's the preach?" She's like, "I'm the preach," and my thought was exactly what John MacArthur would have said. No, you're not.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, it was Catholic Church. I'm not gonna say.
we're on
We're
Facebook
still on
Live.
tape.
So, but anyway, those are. But it's interesting that you say that because you know what?
Oh,
The
my.
21st century ain't so far off from the craziness that
No.
happened in the first century.
Right.
It's just a different, same band, just a different tune. You know what I'm saying? It just,
Yeah.
you know, people get crazy.
That's exactly, yeah.
But anyway, any other thoughts, comments, questions, anything? How you holding up?
After we turn that off, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's pray and we'll be done.
Oh,
and then we'll be. Yeah, it's been a bit.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I know it doesn't seem like that. That's why I have to rein myself in because I'll just keep going. So I have to be conscious of the time. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this opportunity we had to look at your word and look at this pivotal point in history. It is history that's actually alive and well today in our 21st century, and that's the dispensation of the grace of God, this wonderful mystery that you brought to Paul and have enlightened us with this idea that now, here and now, we are part of your family, that Christ paid the price for our sins, and we are now imparted that righteousness, that we now are more than what we were. Dear Lord, I thank you. I thank you so much for loving me, caring about me so much that you brought about this shift in things. I very much am not worthy of it, nor could I earn it or pay you back, and that's not what you're asking. It's a free gift. Salvation is just that, and it's done by your grace and mercy and love. So, dear Lord, once again, I thank you, and I ask you to keep opening our hearts and minds as we study this so that we can truly embrace the importance of what Acts is telling us and where this whole thing begins for us and how important it is for us today to carry that message forward to everyone we meet. Bless this time that we've had. Help it to stir us in our minds and in our hearts. And just help us to continue to just honor you with that information. Dear Lord, bless this time. We take it and lift it up to you in Jesus' name. Amen.